No.
Yeah, I think you just started the recording.
Yeah, but I have no idea where it's going to go.
I should have access to it.
Okay. So we've been having conversations about this. Does anybody have things they want to share, things they've been trying in their classroom around assessment from some of the previous sessions? This is our opportunity to rejoice in some of that. Wow.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
You are. Hey, Stacy, how are you?
Hi. Okay. This is a funny, nice story. I was using the thinking classroom stuff in my chemistry class with all our rate equations and the stoichiometry and all, and the kids really, really liked it. So it kind of became this thing where if I talked for more than 5 minutes, they were like, wait a second, can we go to our boards now? And I'd have kids interrupt me if I tried to like do a PowerPoint or anything. They're like, oh, can we just go try this? And it worked so well. I loved it. Thank you.
Nice. Okay, but let's talk. Thank you for that, but let's get some conversation around assessment going. Bruce, you're always trying something new.
I don't know if I'm always trying something new or just keeping trying. It's been a busy start to the semester, and the whole quarter system has kind of kicked me on. I find it a lot more tiring than when we were doing the just the 2 classes. So things have been slow to start, but I always want to get this stuff in and get it up and running, and I have to slow things down so I can save my sanity. And so I'm introducing a bit more and a bit more and a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, and still around working on rubrics and rejigging rubrics that Pruner gave us. And so yeah, but it hasn't gone as quickly as I would expect it to.
No, thanks for that dose of reality, because I think that's something to remember and to keep in mind, that the reason I think the assessment conversation is so popular is because assessment is something that takes a different type of energy out of us and requires us to invest in a different way. Anybody else?
My name is Tammy. I'm teaching in Penticton. I'm teaching at a grade 4 or 5 level, so I'm not maybe doing the same things that you're all doing. And I don't know what everyone's grade is. It sounds like lots of you know each other, so that's fun. But I find that I have a clothesline in my classroom that I just leave up all year, and we use it for many things, like even the scale of a problem, let's say, so that we can use that vocabulary later on also in math. Trying to just link so much vocabulary back. And I think one thing that I really noticed this year is when my grade 4s and 5s are dealing with numbers, they don't really have a lot of experience, life experience, and neither do their parents with numbers past thousands, because they don't have that kind of money. So when we're looking at real life examples and being able to draw on experience for them, we're really having to unpack that a lot more than I think we've ever had to. So just what the scope is for them of what $525,000 means, because most of their parents don't own homes, they rent. And what would $1 million then look like in grade 4 and 5? So just that ability to move number sense up the scale, because they just don't have real life experience, and then what that might look like as a visual for them. So those are the things where playing with and unpacking, and it's a lot of fun. But everything we do here is assessment. All of that is assessment, because it's very easy to see where they're going wrong or where they need some assistance. And we do a reflective piece with our math as well every time we do something in math. So that really helps me, but it also really helps them know what they're doing and where they need to be.
Nice.
I do appreciate this opportunity and these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. All right, so you're using the number line, you're using the clothesline as a way to represent scale and distance and quantity. Am I correct? Yeah. There are teachers who also use the clothesline as a way to do formative assessment in the sense that students will hang their work on a clothesline where they believe it fits on a continuum, and then use that as feedback to improve their work. Anybody else? Melissa, are you trying to buy a cow, or are you putting your hand up because you want to share something?
Oh, I was waving to a coworker.
Okay. I have something to share. So I've been working with a particular inner city high school in Winnipeg. And they, as a staff, they have a staff of about 70 teachers. They embrace this year outcomes-based assessment across the board. So this is a grade 7 to 12 school, I think it is. They have to report out grades 7s and 8s. They have to report out on a proficiency scale, much like we have in BC. And then 9 through 12, they have to report out a percentage, as well as a proficiency. Anyway, so they adopted as a staff outcomes-based assessment, every subject, every grade. They worked on it through the summer, sort of with readings, and then they started. And I did some work with them, but I really want to credit the staff, because the staff and the leadership there, because they did most of the work. I really came in and just, gave some high fives here and there for things that were going well. So they just finished their first report cards. And because last year was, I don't know, there was something going on last year that disrupted things. They did a comparison on first year report card with 2019. And here are some of the differences. And keep in mind, the only shift they've done is they've shifted to outcomes-based assessment, both in a way of reporting out marks, but also as a way to inform learners where they are in their learning. So one of the data points I looked at was grade 9 math and literacy, because that is really the first time these students get heavily tested at a provincial level. They had an improvement of 30% of students passing. So 30% more students are passing in grade 9 math and literacy as a result of this shift. Their grade 10 essentials, which is basically, I don't want to say it's exactly like our workplace, but it is that third stream of math, or second stream it is for us. So their grade 10 essential math had an improvement of 100% of students who are passing. So they basically doubled the number of students who are passing that course. And grade 11 across the board, so just every subject, grade 11, they have an 80% reduction in students who are failing. So it's just transformative. And overall, they've seen a 25% improvement, 7 to 12 across the board in student marks percentages. It's like this, and it is across the board. So what is it that outcomes-based assessment, which we're going to hear about from Alicia and Nikki, that it does for grading, but it also does for students in their journey as learners. Any thoughts? Anybody? Nope. You're just not going to bite on that?
Nobody wants to talk about assessment.
They just want to hear Alicia and Nikki talk about assessment. They don't want to.
Well, it took us a lot of years to want to talk about assessment, Peter. So that's why we're super excited.
Okay.
Peter,
Sorry, this is the last call. Go ahead, Bruce.
was it outcomes and then a change to a proficiency scale for grading, or was it just outcomes by itself?
No, outcomes by itself. They've been operating on this proficiency scale for a while. and they've been operating at percentages for grade 9 to 12 for a long, like forever. So this is really the big difference, starting to assess students according to what they can do, what they've actually know and can demonstrate in ways outside of just a test, but also that sort of formative assessment piece where the students are also aware where they are in their journey through the outcomes. All right, are we just gonna, okay, so we're gonna turn this over to Alicia and Nikki in a minute. I just want to say a few words about the two of them. So I've known Alicia and Nikki for a very long time. I don't even know how long, but it's Alicia, I think it's at least 10 years that I've known you. And Nikki, I think it's close to that as well. Both Alicia and Nikki did their master's degree they're both based in Grand Prairie, and they both did their master's degree in numeracy through SFU in Grand Prairie, different cohorts, so they didn't do it at the same time. Alicia and Nikki are both, Alicia, are you still a math consultant in your district, or did you go, no, you're administration now.
Yeah, I'm in administration now.
But when I first met Alicia, she was a classroom teacher, and then she was a consultant. Likewise with Nikki, she was a classroom teacher and now is a consultant for one of the districts in Grand Prairie. And there's a great cohort of people up in Grand Prairie who do a lot of work to advance the agenda of math education, both in creating these amazing problem sets that I've advocated for a long time that exist on Alicia's website. And Alicia's also recently published a book called The Dragon Curve, A Magical Math Journey, which is a children's book around, there it is. Nikki is holding it up. So without further ado, we want to hear from you two about your journey into assessment.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. We're super excited.
Yeah, thanks for having us here, everybody. Hope everyone's having a good night tonight.
So we'll just jump on in. It takes a long time, I think. We kind of, after our course this summer with Peter, we realized why assessment has taken so long to talk about.
I'm just in a workshop, but you're totally welcome.
It's kind of like the last frontier. You know, you jump on in, you're doing all the thinking classroom stuff, you're teaching through problem solving, you have rich tasks, you have vertical surfaces, random groups, you're like, yeah, good, got it, great. 10 years later, I'm still like, yeah, good, got it, great. Okay, what about assessment, right? And I feel like we've been saying that for a long time. What about assessment? What about assessment? What about assessment? But I think I kept saying that, but I don't think I was ever really ready to jump into it until this whole thing happened. So I'll let Nikki talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way, working with everything and building thinking classrooms for however many years it's been in my career. The assessment piece has always been that extra little bit that we really wanted to get to, but we didn't quite get to it, couldn't wrap our brain around it. It was a little scary at first as well. And then what ended up happening is we were taking a course with Peter just last summer, right? We did it over into July, and it was just all based on assessment, and it kind of came around from the people in our last master's cohort. So I just did my master's in 2020, and we just wanted extra, we wanted more. So Peter put this course together, and we all did it over the course of the summer, and it really cemented those ideas into our heads, and we could wrap our brain around what assessment in a thinking classroom can look like and how awesome it is. And we're really excited to be able to show you all those things.
Part of our story is, you know, Peter always says, well, just assess how you always assess until you don't like it anymore. So we didn't like it, but we just kept doing it. And then this is kind of the culmination, I feel, of everything coming together at once. And it was, I want to say like epic. I want to say like beautiful. I want to say magical. Oh, for sure. We'll share the slides. It was such an experience. So I think Nikki and I are just going to tell you the story of how this came to be.
We exactly are. So it all started with this guy. And this is a student or a unit map. I've done these before with my kids, just in terms of thinking classroom type of stuff. And this is the one that I gave them right at the end of the year for our very last unit. So it was the last month of school, June, COVID, we were in and out all year long. And I had one more unit that we needed to get through. And I like to give the kids the breakdown of the outcomes, because if they know where they're needing to go, right, then that just helps them along their journey of what they need to learn. So it all started with this, and it was one outcome in Alberta, and it's systems of equations, but it breaks down really beautifully into these 7 different subsections, I guess.
Hold on, Nikki.
Yeah.
We're only seeing the slide, the cover slide of your presentation.
Oh, it's probably on your other screen, Nikki.
Okay, one moment. I have too many screens going on, evidently. Thanks, Peter.
No worries.
How's this now?
Yes, there it is.
Okay, perfect. So here where we're at. So sorry, these are the maps, the little unit maps that I had given my students. And again, just giving them an outline of what we're going to be covering throughout the course, throughout this unit. And then one day I just happened to have a conversation with Alicia because she was my admin last year. And do you want to talk about that part next?
Yeah. So Nikki was like, okay, Alicia, I want to finish strong. And in the meantime, we were supported by Peter's course. So this was all happening at the same time. And so I was like, okay, well, where are you at? And she's like, well, systems of equations. And I was like, oh, do I have the problem for you? So Nikki, do you want to show them what problem?
Yeah.
So this was the problem. And this was basically the impetus for her entire unit, because it was that one outcome. And with those, what were there, 7 I can statements, Nikki, 7 of the skills that came under the solving system of equations outcome. And Nikki just ran with it. So I'll go back to her in a minute, but all I remember that very first day is she gave them the problem the very next day, and I was supposed to be in there, and then I got caught up in the office, and I came just at the end of class, and she was like, that was the best thing that has ever happened. It was amazing. It was nonstop. They worked for the full 75 minutes. It blew my mind. So that was the beginning of this whole part.
Yeah. And keep in mind, I've been doing thinking classroom tasks, good problems, vertical surfaces, random grouping with this group of kids for at least the last 4 or 5 years, because I kind of had followed them up through the grades. So they had a really good handle on what the culture of a thinking classroom is like. But the way that this problem just kind of fell into my lap and how it fits so perfectly with what we wanted to do, it was magical. And there's no other way that I can describe it. And essentially what came about is that we wanted the kids to just tell the story of how they solved the problem. And this was that very first day. So the day after Alicia and I had talked, this was the problem. And these were just some of my groups that were working at their vertical surfaces, working on the problem. They genuinely worked for the entire 75-minute class. And it doesn't always happen that way, right? Tasks don't always last the entire class like that. And you don't always have engagement like that for the whole time. So it was beautiful. And there's no other way to describe it than beautiful.
So what came out of that? What came out of that was there was so much data as well. So as we were taking this course and we were learning about, what data are you looking at? Are you looking at data that's during the task or after the task, or is it in process? Is it a product? So we really started to look at what data the kids were producing, but not just producing, but actually like learning through. So as we were listening to them and talking, and as the previous person was talking about, everything's data. When they're learning, there's data to collect. So observations, conversations, visuals, pictures, the questions that they ask, the prompts that we give them. So we basically just started really paying attention to those pieces, because that was part of our story and that was part of our data gathering.
And then using those unit maps at the beginning that I showed you, that we'll show you again, to keep track of these things. So if I walked around to one of these groups and I could hear their conversation and I could see, oh, they're pointing at like 7.1 and 7.3 right now, we could make that little note on those pages as an observation, as a conversation about, oh, they're getting this stuff. Like that's some evidence that we just gather right now to show that they know what's going on. So then there's just more examples of the visible learning that was happening. This is just obviously after the class. And So again, knowing where the kids were working, if I needed, we could go back through and we could see the work that they had done, again, as more evidence that we could gather for their understanding and for their learning. Alicia, do you want to say this one?
Yeah. So there was another day that I made my way back up there, and Nikki was kind of working on consolidating, and then there were students that were starting to fill out their maps in terms of their evidence for their learning that they were going to use, because a lot of this had to do with student choice. So students got to choose the pieces that they wanted to, and we'll talk more about that later. But there was this one little, he wasn't little, I mean, he's a grade 10, he's actually pretty big. And he looked at me and he was like, it was a light bulb went ping in my brain. It was my first math epiphany. And here I am tearing up and getting all emotional. Then I make him like tell it to me again so I can write it down. And I go and I tell Nikki. And you know, this is a student that in the past, Nikki, I don't think had really been as excited and interested. And all of a sudden he's saying these words, like these literal words came out of a grade 10 boy's mouth. So it was just more pieces of, yep, this is the evidence that we need. We need to keep doing this. So that was a good part.
Yeah. And again, we've done beautiful tasks before and lots of thinking classroom aspects to what we did in learning in class. But the fact that we gave them choice and what they were going to be assessed on this time really, really broadened things. And I don't think we've really talked about that quite yet. So one of the options that kids had to show their understanding, that was the whole point of the unit. And starting with the unit map is, I'm not going to assess you in the same way I normally do. You're going to show me what you know. And there's lots of different ways that you can show me what you know. One of the ways was doing a problem write-up. So it was tell us the story of how you solved the problem. And these are just some examples of some of the ones that that we got in from the students. So yeah, one of the ways was writing up the problem. Here's some more, and we like the contrast of this one because you can very much see the difference in these two students. But when you break it down and you're actually looking at the math that's there, there's no difference in it. The learning was the same. It was two different kids and they communicated in two different ways. That's all they had to do, right? It's not just one specific way to be able to communicate your learning. So we had other options. There is an outcome-based quiz, and these little one-pager quizzes is something that I've used with these kids for years and years and years. If they wanted to do this, great, that was the option they had. I also gave them mystery numbers. So again, kind of playing on the caps and umbrellas problem again. What are the mystery numbers? And they could do those with me watching, or they could do it on a piece of paper or whatever way they wanted to show. This is, again, if they needed more evidence, if we got to that unit map and they realized, oh, I need a little piece for here, and they came to me and said, hey, I need something for 7.2. Okay, well, here's an example for 7.2 that you could do. So we started it all off with these are some examples, but as we got through the unit and as we were going through everything, we had some more things that popped up, and there was some ideas from kids about, well, can I do this? And can I do this? And yeah, of course you can. If they come up with great ways to show their learning, why not? Another option was we had a notes package that we always do, like the meaningful notes, and then check understanding questions. They could use these. So different levels of evidence, I guess, is the way that we would describe it. But again, if that's how they felt comfortable and that's how they wanted to show their learning, there was nothing wrong with that. So these are just examples of the kids filling out the student map. This was the boy, Matthew, who had the epiphany, the math epiphany. And yeah, just wanted to point him out. And you can see here as an example down at the bottom here, this is a DT. Actually, that's a DT right there. What I wanted them to do is when they were filling out their student unit map, they were keeping track and organizing the different pieces that they were going to then present or hand in as their evidence of learning. So when it says caps and umbrellas, well, that was the problem write-up. When it says ICA, that would be considered in-class assignment, which is the check your understanding questions. So there's different ways that they could do it, and the map helped them organize their information to make sure they weren't missing anything. And there's just more examples here. And you can see like G with a check mark. So that was Riley was observed during her group work, demonstrating her learning for all of those little pieces. So that's how I could keep track of everything. And I think that piece was the toughest thing for me to wrap my brain around at first, was being able to keep track of, well, I got 30 some kids in a class. How the heck am I going to do this? And once you just jump in and do it, it's really not that difficult. And I think that was for me, my perceived, like, ooh, that was the roadblock that I couldn't get over.
Totally.
So we also had them do a student self-assessment. So what I ended up doing, because we have to report out on everything, based on the work that they showed me, they received a grade, and everything's done in percentages at this school for high school. They also, I asked them to give themselves a grade based on the work that you did, the knowledge that you gained, the understanding that you showed. What grade do you think you should get? And then they had to write a little explanation about why they think they should get this as well. And so these are just, again, a few examples of the self-assessment that the kids did. And we were wondering at first how aligned they would be, how connected they would be between the grades that we assess them as and where they assess themselves. So we put this little chart together, and I think it's pretty obvious in many of these cases, they're pretty close to being spot on with each other, which I think if you're hesitant about going this way in your assessment practice, hopefully this kind of eases some of your fears in that, the one-off situation of the kid's just going to wildly give themselves 100%, even though they didn't earn 100%. So it's pretty close to me that you can see that they're connected. Just another example of the student self-assessment and this assessment that we did. So everything was 2, 3, and then a 4 out of a total of 28 possible points. And you can see how it's broken down. So part 3 on the quiz was question 3 and 4. That was for 9.1. So if they happened to do that assessment, we would know where they would be based on that evidence. Well, what happens if we didn't have enough data? Because that's always something that you're worried about. Riley, as an example, half of her poster board blew away in a really crazy windstorm that we had one day. So she came in the morning, tears streaming down her face because she only had half of her project. And the thing with that student, because I knew where she was at the whole time, I didn't make her redo it. She offered, but I was like, no, not at all. I knew where you were at. I know that you know this stuff. I don't need you to redo it anymore. And then a different example, Riley R. I didn't have as much evidence for Riley R. Riley R. didn't particularly like to come to school all that much. So that was when we looked at that, the unit map, and we could see, okay, I need to talk to Riley about 9.2 or 7.2 and 7.5. So when I found Riley at school, I took him aside and was like, hey, like, I need a little bit more. You didn't quite get enough. Let's talk about what we can do. And it wasn't tough to track those kids down and just focus on the ones that you needed to focus on to get that little bit of extra evidence that you needed.
I sent out an email last week on how to access history science.
Okay, I thought someone had a question. And then lastly, we asked for their feedback because this was brand new for what I was doing in my classroom with these kids. Not outcome-based assessment was new, but the choice that they had to show their understanding, that was new. So what Alicia and I wanted to do was find out what they liked, what they didn't like. And pretty much most of the responses that we got was they liked that they had choices. They liked that they had the different options. And that was just stemming from conversations that I'd had with kids all year. You've got kids that are going to write a test or a quiz and they just freeze up and they can't do it, but they like to put together like a cool, fancy looking project, whatever. Everyone learns different, right? So I think giving those options and giving those choices is what's really magical about this. And then everyone has an entry point and you're not eliminating anybody just because they can't write a test.
One of the nice comments that one of the kids said that really touched me was they said something about you're still learning. Like the assessment is still part of the learning. And I was like, that's such a beautiful statement, because isn't that what we all want? Like when the assessment is actually a part of the learning, because that's why we want to assess in the first place, right? Find out where we are, find out where we need to go, and then find out how to get there, how to improve. So the students started to value that, I think. And once we finish,
Thank you.
Once we finish this part, Nikki, I'll just talk a little bit about the grade 9s this year too.
Yeah, for sure. And just to go along with that, Alicia, is it was go with your own pace. Like I'm just looking at this one comment right here. It was at your own pace and gave you more freedom. And I don't know about you, but our kids, like students, just have so much going on in their lives these days, and they might not be able to just fit into the box of the school day. So if they need more time, or if they wanted to take more time or whatnot, they had that option, even though it was at the end of the year and we technically were at a time crunch. They knew when the last possible date was that I could take anything in to be able to report on it. So they had those times. And then the kids who wanted to finish early and could finish early really liked that option as well, that they could just kind of get it done and be done with it. And the last thing we're just going to share with you is our email addresses. So if you did have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out, and we'd love to chat with you. Alicia, do you want to talk about grade 9s?
Yeah, Nikki, do you want to just go back to like an example of one of the like framework? Yeah, not like, yeah, like those ones. So I'll just basically give you kind of a rundown, because this was like the last outcome, the last unit for Nikki. And then starting in September, I'm like, okay, I'm doing it. Let's go. So basically, I have for each outcome or each couple of outcomes. Like for example, I started with perfect squares and square roots. So there were 2 outcomes, I think, for me in Math 9. So I had my framework was 2 outcomes on the page. And basically, I just mapped everything that we did that I felt would have been good evidence to collect was just mapped on there. So when you look at the 3 columns, you can see like first, next, then. So that's basically where they're divvied up into. We don't like to say easy, medium, and hard, because it's really, what did we need to learn first? What could we then learn next, or first, next, and then what's next, like what's then. So we kind of played with those words a little bit, but basically when we were looking at all of the things that the students were doing, we could map them into those 3 columns. So easy, medium, hard, whatever you want to call them. The interesting thing in my grade 9 class is we actually do that quite often together. So, you know, I'll give them like, I don't know, a practice quiz of old PET questions, and which there are actually some really good questions in there. And we'll look at them together and we'll say, what do we think this one is once we've worked through it? And the kids are actually helping me map it onto first, next, then. You know, so first would be a 2. So if you got the first steps, that's 50%. You have the basic understanding of that outcome. If you got up into a next, that would be a 3 out of 4. If you got up to the then, that would be your 4 out of 4. And then of course there's, you know, sometimes they're like, well, I don't really know if I'm a 3 or a 4. Like I'm working towards a 4, but I don't have enough check marks in the 4 column. So then we'll put a 3.5, right? So the students are actually part of this adventure too, which I think is so empowering for them. The beauty of it is, for me, is say you don't really know what to do and you're like, well, I have all of my unit exams and I have my quizzes and I have these different projects that I do. Everything can be mapped onto this map, right? You can take every question, and every question on your unit exam can be mapped onto where it fits with the outcome and if it's an easy, medium, or hard. So then you just have an abundance of evidence, and you'll soon find that you probably don't need as many quizzes as you thought you did. You probably don't need as many tests as you thought you did, because there's just so much evidence. So when we look at those 3 columns, basically in my class now, if I see 2 or 3 check marks in any given column, it's pretty easy to see where they fall, and the students can see it as well, and it's quite visual. So say they're all striving, or they're in the middle and there's a student who's trying to get to the then, and they can see, okay, I don't have any check marks there. Obviously I know what I need to do now. And as I get better and better and better and get more organized, and my mapping gets a little bit better too, and the students help me map it, there's just so many options for them to choose from. So it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to take a whole bunch of work. It just has to, you just have to take the leap and just kind of jump in, just start with 1 or 2 outcomes, depending on what you're working on. And it kind of just flows from there. Oh, the G was for group work. So they showed that evidence in a group, you know, so then you can kind of say, okay, did I see enough evidence of them, or do I need more evidence at that same level independently? There's O for observations.
Yeah, that guy right there is the O.
Yeah.
And thanks for saying that, Alicia. That's something I've forgot to mention, is you generally want to see at least 2 pieces of evidence per outcome. That's kind of the guideline for this. So you can see there's a lot of just like 2 check marks in there, knowing that that's where the kids are at. And it is easy. It's really quite easy to do it in the end.
And Nikki and I did this together, which when we're saying it's easy, I think part of the easy was because we were together, because it was quite scary at first. And I think the fact that we've been around a while, we've been to every single PD Peter's ever offered. I think the fact that we were together and that we had Peter and the assessment course with us just made us more brave to take the leap. And it was all good things that came out of it. So if it is something that you know, and I'm sure you're all in different parts of this journey and have lots of stuff to share back with us too. But sometimes it's just having that person that's going to take the risk with you. You know, so she had a supportive admin because it was me. She had a lot of confidence in what she had learned because of all of her education and all of her experiences. And she just ran into it. What I'm finding this year is I had a little piece that really stuck with me. And it was that, you know, if a student is like a 50 student, or they have often shown that they get 50% on an exam or whatever. Well, when you're assessing this way, getting that 50% is a victory. Whereas when it's on a unit exam and they got half right, it's a failure. It sucks, right? But if they're assessing at that first level, when they're earning that 50%, it's a victory. Nobody's being punished. And once they've earned that 50%, they can move on and they can move into the next column. And once they've earned that part, they can move on into the next column. So everything's with positive momentum, you know, whereas if you get a student who's constantly getting 50% on a test, it's like they're constantly being failed and punished and beaten down. So no wonder kids struggle with assessment. No wonder we've always struggled with assessment. So yeah, that was a big piece kind of this week as Nikki and I were talking that hit me quite hard, because I way rather see it as gathering points to build them up than punishing them with averages. And
definitely. And I think that, so I moved into a math coordinator role this year, but I think that if I had my own classroom again, I don't see myself being able to go back to not doing it this way. Just like when I first learned about thinking classrooms, I can't go back. There's no way I can go back. So just the last piece of the puzzle, and just take that leap of faith. That's all we got to say, is take that leap of faith. And I don't think you'll be disappointed.
there was a question, Nikki, and it says, who keeps copies? Oh, sorry. The other piece too was O was for observations. So when we observed them, demonstrating that understanding. C was for conversations. So conversations we had, or potentially they were having with other students that showed their conversation. And then the G was the group work. And then was there anything else in there that?
I don't think
Okay.
so. Because all of the other pieces were lined up or already outlined on there.
Okay.
And some,
Hold
yeah,
on.
sorry, go ahead.
There's one
So
more
don't
question.
feel a need to answer these questions right now. We're going to send them
okay.
out to the groups to discuss, and then they're going to come back and have questions for you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So are we done?
Yeah.
I think so.
I know, it's so fast.
Well, that was terrific, and we'll make sure that on our website we'll actually post the link to that presentation as well. And I just want to add two things to that before we go into small groups. Like Alicia's last comment there about how it felt like we're building up a mark rather than tearing down to a 50 is really, really true. In traditional assessment, in theory, every student starts with 100%, and then we just deduct every time they do something wrong until we land where they are. Whereas in outcomes-based assessment, it's really, we're building up from the ground up, right? And what that means is that every brick is a victory. So it's always a step forward rather than losing. And if you think back to your students who are stressed and are in there fighting for that extra 2 marks on a mid or on a quiz, because they've lost something and they feel like they can never get it back, and that disappears in outcomes-based assessment. The other thing I want to say is that I remember the day where everything clicked for you too in the course, because it was when you were analyzing that data that I gave you and you ended up in the same group. And it was, and as Alicia said, she has seen that data 20 times. She has heard me talk about it, but it was at that moment, there was a synergy and a timing that was perfect. And then, as David Pym says, when the learner is ready, the teacher will appear. And that was your time. What we're going to do now, just for those of you who are new, is we're going to put you out into groups to discuss what you just heard. Just talk it through, share your ideas, maybe link it to what's happening in your life and what you're doing in your practice right now. And then we're going to come back. We're going to come back at 4:30, and then we're going to have half an hour with Alicia and Nikki of just Q&A. So you're going to have about 18 minutes out in the groups. So I'm going to set that up right now. Accept the invitation. And let me just see here now. Just making sure. Yeah, and of course, Alicia and Nikki ended up in the same group. So I'm gonna change that. All right, accept the invitation and have some fun out there. Have some conversation. I'll call you back in a bit. Come back, everybody.
Whoops.
We had a great conversation in my group, and if anybody, I can tell you this, if anybody wants to learn how to hack MyEd BC to do outcomes-based assessment, Stacey Brown's your person. She told us how to hack it. Anyway, where's Alicia? There's Alicia and Nikki. Good, awesome. This is a part of the session we call Q&A, questions and abuse. Feel free to throw your questions at Alicia and Nikki, and feel free to put them in the chat or to turn on your microphone.
There was one question about who keeps the folder before. I can answer for my class. I have, every student has a folder, and I have a back, like a, I have one right here.
Like a bin for filing things, yeah.
Right. Okay, and then all my folders are in here, and it's labeled with students' names, and then they each have their folder, and everything goes into that folder. So anything that's evidence of assessment goes into that folder. All of the framework pages go into that folder as well. I'll add things on their framework page, and they'll add things on their framework page. So at the end, it's a messy, just like my personality. Nikki probably does it differently and is probably a lot more organized. So to you, Nikki.
Well, Michelle brought up something great in our group. She's like, it's like a portfolio. Like if I was to do this exact same thing for every single unit through the course of the year, it's like a portfolio. You're going to have all of this evidence of what those kids learn throughout the course of the year. I did the same thing, Alicia. We had those filing things, and every kid had like a portfolio and had a space to put it in. For this particular example, the kids had their own version of the unit map that was blank, and that's where they can write in how they're going to show me and like organize their thoughts in that way. And then we had a teacher version which had the columns and all the different pieces laid out in the first, next, then to keep track of things that we observed, the conversations that we had, the things that we marked, all of those different pieces.
And that's how portfolios were originally intended. Portfolios came out of the outcomes-based assessment idea of as a place where students would evidence their learning, and it turned into a thing where we would use it for student-led conferences where we would tell the students what to put in it. And it just shouldn't be that way. It's supposed to be the other way around. Okay, here we go. Janet's got a question.
Oh, yes. So that was what was like mind blowing for us in Nikki's or in Peter's course when he was like, and they were on their own thing and they were doing their little tangent. So when you look at our chart, like the 3 columns. So
Nikki, can you show that again? Because
I will. Yeah.
So the first would be, yeah, there we go. Okay. So that first column, so their check marks, if they have a whole bunch of check marks in that first column, that's 50%. That's a pass. That is that they show basic understanding of every one of those I can statements. If they're in the next column, then that was a 3 on the 4-point scale. So if they could show that they're heavy in that next column, so whether it was 2 or 3 check marks, then that would be their 3 out of 4. Or same thing if they were 4. So if there are 2 or 3 check marks were as well in the more extended questions, in that third row, then that would have been their 4 out of 4. They could have 2.5 if they were between first and next. They could have 3.5 if they were between next and then. So for example, this mark ended up being out of 80, I think it was, right, Nikki? Because they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they had 7 I can statements that they were collecting evidence for. And then that all ended up being their mark out of 80.
No, it's out, so, sorry,
or sorry,
Alicia, there,
no,
it's
you
out
go
of
ahead.
28. This was the percentage that the student gave themselves, and this
yeah,
is
sorry.
that we
Yeah.
ended up.
Oh yeah, you can see down here how we added it up.
Yeah, out of 28, just 4 for each, and added it up, and then the simple percentage, and
Because that
that's
was all of the data on one outcome.
yes. Which again, when you think about, like, there might be one check mark somewhere in a row, but again, this is one outcome specifically. So technically, if we're thinking we only need to gather 2 pieces of evidence, I've got way more than 2 pieces of evidence written down here.
Oh, there's a question. How can you get, some of our 4s were blank, Nikki, do you want to talk about that? Or then, some of our then columns or
Yeah.
comments.
So I kind of mentioned in my group how this then, is that the column that we're talking about? Oh, I
Yeah.
just lost it. That's kind of mastery level questions. Those are like the extra questions that I've honestly had students not get to, and they are okay with not getting to it just because they've been so solid in other things, and they're like, I'm good. So when you see again ICA or part 3, those are the paper assessment options that the kids had. They didn't have to do either of those things, but if they wanted to, that was one way that we could find evidence for them. I've lost the question. Oh, there it
So what
is.
about the blank spots?
Yeah,
where
so
the
for
board's
example,
examples.
9.1, 9.2, and 9.6.
So we just didn't have anything that fell into that category. So it depends on, like, we definitely have, you can see in this one down here in 9.6, this kid has 2 check marks for ICA question 4 and question 5, and they got a 4, even though technically that's in the 3-level column. But because there wasn't anything above it, we made the judgment call based on what they did show us that, yeah, they have an excellent understanding of what's happening for that particular piece. So we felt comfortable giving them that 4.
Yeah. And part of your journey will be figuring out what pieces you're going to put in that then column. I've also done a couple of things where, you know, say it was a project and I wanted to fit it into my framework. We looked at the project or the result of their project or whatever it was. And we said, where are you showing understanding of this project? Are you showing it at a first level, a next level, or a then level? So it's looking at it a little bit differently with a different piece of evidence, if you understand what I'm saying. Like, it's not necessarily that data point would be like taking the whole project and then deciding, okay, did you show at a first, a next, or a then? So a little bit more like a rubric, like how we would in the past. So I have done that a couple of times too, just to try to fit that, some of those other pieces into my framework.
Great question, Stacy. I think I would actually have to look up exactly what the wording was. It's probably just solving systems of equations. So one thing we didn't mention in the presentation, and I'm not sure why we didn't get to it, is after we did that problem the first time, then we had a few days of learning the skills to actually solve systems of equations, right? Because there's different ways. You can use a graph, you can do substitution, like there's lots of different ways to solve systems. After we went through those learning pieces and we practiced and we did check your understanding questions, we did the problem again. We went right back to it because what they could do at that point was extend their thinking. The first day that we did the problem, they could get to, I'm just going to find the pictures. They could get to knowing that the answer was 24, 28 by doing different algebraic equations to figure out what that's the answer. But they might not have had the understanding of what that 24 and 28 actually meant in terms of solving a system of equation. So when we had those learning pieces and those little mini lessons, then we went back to the problem the second time. It really consolidated and solidified that understanding in their heads.
So then when they were telling the story of how they solved it, then they included like, well, here, we also graphed it. We also used substitution. We also used an algebraic expression. Like it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Like these guys. I will look that up, Stacy. I'll find the actual wording for you because it's Alberta curriculum and I don't even remember what it is.
There was a question, is there a set of exemplars for what developing and proficient and extending criteria looks like? We have, there's a district, West Wind district in Southern Alberta, who their whole district took a, their goal was assessment, and they created basically an assessment checkup, which we use as Check Your Understanding. And they just mapped out their like their part 1 questions are basic, the part 2 questions, and it's just 1 page. It's awesome. And the part 2 questions are more applied. And then the part 3 question is always like an extension question. And often the extension question requires like knowledge in other curriculum. So that's kind of like the little bonus at the end. That's to push kids to take it and apply it somewhere else. So that was helpful for me. And I know Nikki used them as well. And we have them, I think, for grade 8, 9, and 10, but they're linked to Alberta curriculum. But that is
And
something.
11, I've got 20 as well. Sorry.
Oh, you have 11 too? Perfect. And I mean, I could also contact Westwind. Maybe they would be okay with us sharing. Maybe they have more that they could share if there's some of you. But basically it's that. It's like, you know, taking what you've already know and what you already teach with and just deciding where they fit. The students are so good at helping them with that as well. But we can definitely share. You want to show that you had a picture, I think, Nikki, of one of the like Check Your Understandings, the checkups. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, too many screens here. I'm sure that I did somewhere.
Yeah, right here.
This
You can
was-
see. Yeah, these ones right in the middle.
These were the quizzes. Those are the 1-pager.
But look, it's like the part 1, the part 2, the part 3.
Yeah.
It's like those versions, right, from Westwind.
Yes, that's exactly what they are. Yeah.
So yeah, you can use them as quizzes. Sometimes we use them as partner quizzes. Sometimes they worked on them independently. Sometimes they worked on them as practice because they made like version 1, 2, and sometimes 3. So sometimes if it was a practice just to kind of see where you're at, that could be Check Your Understanding, but then they could come back and they could do the version 2 for a more formal assessment if you wanted. So
So to
that
answer
was really
Jody's,
helpful.
sorry, Alicia.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
To answer Jody's question, do you do summative assessment tests in each unit? These are exactly what I would only do as my summative for each unit before. These 1-pager little, I called them quizzes because kids hate when you say exam or something. But I did this. This is exactly what I did. And then throughout the unit, I had things like exit slips and just little other types of formative pieces that would work as well. So when we went to this unit where they had more choice in what they were doing, this was still one of the options, but a lot of kids liked that they could do something else to show their understanding as well.
And you could still give your summative exam and just map it out. And you'll probably start to make your exams a little bit shorter because you'll realize how many times you're assessing the same part of the outcome. Yeah.
But each student can, oh my God.
Yes, so that was part of it. So Nikki, remember at the end, because it was a unit with only one outcome, it was a little bit awkward because we were like, so what, we're just going to put one mark up. So we ended up putting our combined mark and then the student's mark as well. So, and I think, I can't remember how you weighted it, Nikki, but we ended up only having 2 report card marks. However, I mean, you could, I guess, break it down into all of those little marks out of 4 if you need more marks. Right, because it's all just showing where they are for each piece.
Yeah, I think we just weighted it 50-50, to be honest, I think is what we ended up doing. Just to answer the question from previously, the actual outcome for this is solve problems that involve systems of linear equations in 2 variables, graphically and algebraically. And again, when we go back to that problem, that's why it was so beautiful, because it just hit every single thing that we needed it to hit. It hit all 7 of those sub outcomes or skills. Reporting systems, you would list systems of equations, give a mark, then another large scale of. Yeah, so in our reporting system, we don't have to link it to anything. We can just put in assignments, tests, quizzes, projects, whatever you want to call them. And I just had, I think, systems of equations teacher and systems of equations student for that piece, and then it was weighted 50-50. And I'm pretty sure I put the percent directly in because we could pick whether it's points or percentages or whatever. And the cool thing about this too is the kids before report cards even came out and before marks were live on PowerSchool, they knew where they were at. They knew how well they did because they gave the evidence.
How often do students struggle badly to meet outcomes in the first column, and what do you do with them?
I don't know. I feel like that's the bare minimum. And I've always told the kids, everyone's here. We're striving to get to the middle column. And then our goal ultimately is if we can get to the last column. I just think that's meeting kids where they're at. So if you know that they're struggling in little pieces, then we're meeting them where they're at and we're helping them out with those extra things. Maybe it's an extra lesson, whatever it might be.
Often I found, sorry, some of those kids too, they were assessing them differently helped them a lot because you actually could see what they know because they had so many different opportunities to show you. So whether it was working with a partner at the board, whether it was having an oral conversation with you, whether it was like you watching them do some math. So it wasn't always a pen and paper task. So the data that you collected or that we collected, it gave us more information about that student. So most of my students are at that 50 pretty quickly. And then the ones that might not be, then they just get more targeted attention. But I find just by varying the assessment, a lot of them were there and I wouldn't have known that before.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree. Do we miss any questions?
And I feel like a lot of you are doing really cool things in assessment. Like I wish you would have talked to us more at the beginning. You know, there's people doing grade lists. There's people like already doing outcome based. There's a lot of really cool things happening. So maybe we just need to be part of this group, Nikki.
I think so. I think so.
You're welcome to join.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, you're welcome, David. How to start? Just pick an outcome. Pick one outcome. And then it's less overwhelming. It's easier to map. You're very focused if you can.
How do you pick content? So when we say content, are we talking about tasks and whatnot? Again, this specific problem fell into my lap when Alicia and I were talking about it. And that's, again, I still go back to how beautiful it was. And it just, to me, was so meant to be. For the other things like the check your understanding questions and any of those pieces, I've made documents pulling problems from any type of resource I can find. And quite frankly, a lot of them come from textbooks. So I don't use textbooks in my class. Like I'm not assigning here, do page so-and-so in these questions, but I use textbooks as a resource. They're chock full of great problems and great questions that you can use. And then from there, picking where they're at in terms of a first, next, then goes back to, well, what are the outcomes that we're using? Is it something that's going to require information from a different unit or whatnot? So that's how we kind of can differentiate between where they're at. And I love what Alicia's doing with the grade 9s. She has the kids help her and figure out where they're going to be put into the different columns.
Bruce has a question.
Hi, where do you get the outcomes from? Because our curriculum, at least in BC, has gone all the way from the prescribed learning outcomes that we used to have, and now it's much more free. And so do you guys build your own outcomes for each of these units?
Well, no, we have to follow our document, but I would say that's amazing. You could just teach through big, beautiful problems all day long.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
Those I can statements were just resources that I've just collected through the years. So in Alberta curriculum, I think I've got 7, 8, 9, and 10 I can statements for all of the math. And again, those statements weren't necessary because it was technically one outcome, but I liked that we could break it down into specific pieces. So I might not do that for every unit, depending on what specific outcomes are there, because there might be enough anyways. But if we can break things down into smaller pieces, again, just the building blocks of the knowledge that they're going to need to show, I think it just makes it organizes nicely, and it just makes it easy for everyone involved.
And to be clear, Bruce, like the BC curriculum has systems as an outcome. Well, it's content. We don't talk about outcomes, but it is a content. And it has 4 elaborations, which I think could easily be turned into 4 I can statements. If that's, you know, if that's what you want to do, but it's there.
You could also build outcomes using the curricular competencies as well. Like if we're talking systems of linear equations, one of the outcomes would be to represent a solution to a linear system in multiple ways, which would link with part of the curricular competencies.
Nice.
That's what you do. You find people who are already working there and you join them. That's what I do.
Sometimes they're in the same building with you.
Yep. Lucky,
And then they
lucky.
leave.
And then they leave, but she's not that far away though.
We still hang out. Someone's got to spread the good word in this new district, right?
There was a question about retention. To be honest, I haven't noticed a difference. I don't know if I really observed retention before either, right? So that'll be a neat area of research, Peter, if you're interested.
I can speak to that. Can you,
Perfect.
Can you stop the screen share?
Yeah.
So, Roz, it's a good question, this idea of retention, and it's kind of tricky. But it's, what do we mean when we talk about retention? Do we mean that if they've learned it, then 3 months later they can still do it, or 6 months later they can still do it? I don't think that's the kind of retention that we actually want our students to be able to do. It'd be nice, but then it's not going to happen. So it's not about, think of it like a sliding scale. So you have a student who learns systems of linear equations in September, and then at the drop of a hat, they can still do it in April. Okay, great. That's a small percentage of students. Then there's the students who they learn it in September, and in April they're going, no, you never taught us this. We've never seen this before. They're absolutely convinced that this is like, what are you talking about? That's the other end of the scale. And that's, we're talking a very small percentage of students at either end. Everybody else is somewhere in between, which is that it's not about whether they can pull it back out at the drop of a hat. It's how small a cue, what kind of cues does it take for it to come flooding back? And that's a different question, right? So if we do a question with students, for example, let's say Nikki was teaching these students next year, the same year, this year, same students from last year, and it's November, and she says, okay, let's, you all remember how to do systems of linear equations, and they're like, huh? And then she puts them into groups and gives them the hats and an umbrella problem again, and then leave them for half an hour to work in their groups on it. At the end of that half hour, almost all of them will have retrieved 80% of what they learned. But they needed that cue, they needed that support, they needed that method of bringing it forward. And that's why I think retention as an assessment, as a measure of learning, is really risky. It really is risky. But it's been there for a long time.
Yeah, I thank you for addressing it that way, because I am most interested in retention, not of specific content, but in terms of their curricular competency. Like, can they actually continue to tackle a problem with the same perseverance? So yeah, not of specific content, but of, and like you say, if you give them the task again the next year and cue them in certain ways. Yeah, because my hope is that with more focus on the curricular competencies versus the content, then the retention will actually be, depending on how you define it, but the retention will increase because they're learning the process over the product.
Yeah. And they're learning some of those learning skills as well. The foundations of learning rather than just the objects of learning. Anybody else? We got 4 more minutes here. A lot of people have dropped out. Okay, well, I think we should just give Alicia and Nikki a huge round of applause.
Oh, thank you for having us. I loved our conversations.
Yeah,
I think-
thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. It's awesome being here.
And you're welcome to come back to future conversations as well.
Thank you.
And I think this is what's really important for us all to remember. This is a work in progress. If you think about every one of the people who have done a share out in one of these sessions, not one of them has sat there and said, okay, I got this figured out. Right? Like it's all got the story of this journey, and we're in the middle of the journey, and there's things that we're still figuring out, and there's room for variance. Like Alicia talks about, I like it chaotic, and Nikki's probably more organized, and there's just this, there's room to find yourself within this space. It's a philosophical shift, but there's still room for you to establish your own territory within that. So keep on the journey, and even if you haven't made a switch yet, listen to what Alicia and Nikki have talked about, this idea that eventually you get to this point where it all just flips over for you, and then you're there. But that's never going to happen if you just decide to retreat. So thank you again, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.